This story follows a man who spent his entire life being strong for others. He carried every responsibility, solved every problem, and stayed silent about his own pain. Over time, he grew exhausted, but he believed that if he ever showed weakness, people would stop valuing him. Slowly, he realized that while holding everyone else together, he was losing himself. The moment he learned to say no, everything began to change. He discovered that real strength isn't about enduring everything in silence, but about knowing your limits and choosing honesty. Some people accepted this change, others walked away. In the end, he understood that peace comes from staying true to yourself, not from sacrificing yourself for others. If this story resonates with you, like the video. Subscribe for more deep emotional stories like this, and tell me in the comments, what part of this journey feels like your own? He had always been the person others leaned on when life became too heavy to carry alone. From a young age, people noticed that he stayed calm when others panicked, that he listened more than he spoke, and that he rarely showed frustration or fear. Adults called him mature, friends called him dependable, and coworkers later called him reliable. What no one ever asked was how he learned to be that way. The truth was simple and painful at the same time. He learned early that strength made people comfortable, and weakness made them turn away. Whenever he stayed quiet and composed, he was praised. Whenever he tried to express confusion or sadness, the room grew awkward. Slowly, without meaning to, he trained himself to hide what he felt and present only what others needed to see. As the years passed, that habit turned into an identity. He became the listener, the helper, the problem solver. When friends struggled with relationships, finances, or self-doubt, they came to him. He stayed up late on phone calls, offering advice that was thoughtful and calm, advice that often helped others move forward. When the calls ended and the silence returned, he was left alone with thoughts he never shared. He told himself this was normal, that everyone felt tired sometimes, that adulthood demanded endurance. At work, his reputation grew stronger. Managers trusted him with responsibility because he never complained and never failed to deliver. He arrived early, stayed late, and carried workloads others avoided. Promotions came quietly, not because he asked for them, but because people relied on him. Praise made him uncomfortable, but failure terrified him. He feared disappointing people more than exhaustion, so he pushed himself even harder. His personal relationships followed the same pattern. He was present, attentive, and supportive. He remembered important details, checked in regularly, and offered reassurance without being asked. Partners described him as safe and steady, someone who made life feel manageable. What they did not see was the distance he kept between himself and vulnerability. When asked how he was doing, his answers were always brief and harmless. He was not lying, but he was never fully honest either. Over time, the weight of constant strength began to settle into his body. Sleep became shallow and restless. Mornings felt heavier than they should have. Moments of quiet no longer felt peaceful. They felt uncomfortable. He filled his days with tasks and his nights with distractions, afraid that slowing down would force him to confront feelings he did not know how to name. Still, he continued. Helping others gave him purpose, and being needed made him feel valuable. Without that role, he did not know who he was. One evening, after another long day of solving other people's problems, he sat alone in his parked car. The engine was off, the street was silent, and his phone lay untouched beside him. For the first time in a long while, no one needed him. No messages, no calls, no expectations. The silence pressed in around him, heavier than any conversation he had carried that day. As he sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, he became aware of how tired he truly was. Not just physically, but deeply, emotionally tired. A thought surfaced slowly, one he had avoided for years. He wondered what would happen if he stopped being strong for everyone else. The question lingered in the quiet, unsettling, and unfamiliar. And in that moment, he realized something he had never allowed himself to see before. He had spent his entire life being strong for others, yet he had never learned how to be strong for himself. The days that followed looked the same on the outside, but something inside him had quietly shifted. He continued waking up early, preparing for work, and moving through his routine with practiced precision. Yet there was a growing awareness beneath every action. Conversations felt heavier than before, not because people had changed, but because he had. When colleagues asked for help, he gave it. When friends needed reassurance, he offered it. Still, a small part of him noticed how automatic his responses had become, how easily he slipped back into the role he had played for so long. At work, meetings blurred together. He spoke when necessary, nodded when expected, and delivered results without drawing attention to himself. Yet, during moments of quiet, he caught himself staring at nothing, lost in thought. He began to notice the subtle signs of strain he had ignored for years. The tension in his shoulders never fully released, His jaw stayed clenched even when he was alone. Sleep came late and left early, offering no real rest. At night, his mind replayed conversations, not searching for mistakes, but wondering why no one ever noticed how tired he was. Friends still called, often without warning, unloading their worries as they always had. He listened, offered calm advice, and reassured them with steady words. When the calls ended, he sat in silence, feeling strangely invisible. It wasn't that people were unkind. They simply saw him as he had always presented himself: strong, capable, unshaken. And because he never asked for more, they never thought to give it. He began to understand that this pattern was not something imposed on him, but something he had helped create. By never showing weakness, he had taught people not to look for it. This realization did not bring relief. It brought responsibility. For the first time, he wondered whether his exhaustion was not just the result of carrying others, but of never allowing himself to be carried. Still, change did not come easily. Old habits held tight, and fear whispered warnings whenever he considered doing something different. What if opening up made people uncomfortable? What if they pulled away? What if strength was the only reason he mattered? These questions followed him through crowded rooms and quiet mornings alike. He began spending more time alone, not because he wanted isolation, but because it felt safer than pretending. Silence, though uncomfortable, felt more honest than constant performance. Yet even in solitude, he struggled to rest. His thoughts stayed active, circling the same unanswered questions. He sensed that something in his life needed to change, but he did not yet know how or where to begin. All he knew was that continuing the same way felt impossible. The awareness he had gained could not be undone. And although he was still standing, still helping, still appearing strong, the foundation beneath that strength had begun to shift, quietly preparing him for a confrontation with himself he had avoided for far too long. As the weeks passed, the awareness he carried grew heavier, settling into every corner of his life. He noticed how easily he slipped into the background during conversations, how naturally people assumed he would handle things without question. At work, responsibilities continued to pile up, not because he volunteered, but because everyone expected him to manage. He rarely refused. Saying no still felt foreign, almost wrong, as if turning something down would unravel the image others held of him. Yet each agreement drained him further. He began to feel a quiet resentment, not toward the people around him, but toward himself for allowing the pattern to continue. In moments alone, he replayed small interactions, wondering when he had last spoken honestly about his own feelings. The answer unsettled him. He could not remember. Even when exhaustion pressed down on him, he minimized it in his own mind, telling himself it wasn't serious, that others had it worse. This habit of comparison kept him trapped, denying his own needs by measuring them against everyone else's pain. Physically, the strain became harder to ignore. His body felt tense even during rest, his thoughts restless even in silence. Mornings no longer brought a sense of readiness, only obligation. Still, he moved forward, fueled by routine rather than purpose. One evening, he declined a call for the first time in years. The phone vibrated on the table, and he watched it without reaching for it. The moment felt strangely powerful and deeply uncomfortable. Guilt followed immediately, sharp and familiar, but beneath it was something else. Something quieter. Relief. The realization startled him. He had always believed that being available defined his worth. Yet here he was, choosing distance, and the world had not collapsed. No anger followed. No consequences arrived. Life simply continued. That small decision stayed with him. It lingered in his thoughts, challenging assumptions he had never questioned. He began to wonder how many of his fears were imagined, how many expectations existed only because he had reinforced them. The idea that he might have a choice unsettled him more than the exhaustion ever had. Choice meant responsibility. It meant facing the possibility that he had contributed to his own isolation. This understanding did not bring immediate change, but it marked a turning point. He was no longer unaware. He could not return to the comfort of ignorance. Every interaction now carried a quiet tension, a sense that something unspoken waited beneath the surface. And while he was still playing the role everyone expected, a part of him had begun to step back, watching closely, preparing for a shift he did not yet fully understand but could no longer avoid. The shift inside him did not announce itself loudly. It arrived quietly, through hesitation, through pauses where there had once been automatic agreement. He began noticing how often people spoke without waiting for his response, already assuming the answer would be yes. At first, he still followed through, but something about it felt different now. Each time he agreed, he felt a subtle resistance inside, a reminder that he was choosing familiarity over honesty. At work, new responsibilities were added to his schedule without discussion. He accepted them as he always had, but the weight felt heavier than before. Tasks that once energized him now drained him completely. He caught himself staring at his screen, rereading the same sentence over and over, unable to focus. His mind wandered to questions he had never given space to before. What did he actually want? When was the last time he made a decision based on his own needs rather than others' expectations? These thoughts followed him home, lingering in the quiet hours of the evening. He spent more time alone, not out of isolation, but because solitude no longer felt like something to escape. It felt necessary. In those moments, memories surfaced, small moments he had brushed aside over the years. Times he had wanted to speak but chose silence. Times he needed support but convinced himself he didn't deserve it. Each memory carried the same pattern: restraint, patience, endurance. He began to see how deeply that pattern had shaped him. Even his sense of self-worth was tied to how much he could carry without breaking. One night, he stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, studying his reflection. The person staring back looked familiar, yet distant. There were lines of fatigue around his eyes. Tension set into his expression. He wondered how long he had been ignoring these signs, how many warnings he had dismissed in the name of strength. The thought unsettled him. Strength, he realized, had become something rigid, something unforgiving. It left no room for rest, no space for error. And yet, letting go of it felt terrifying. Who would he be without it? Would people still value him if he stopped holding everything together? These questions had no immediate answers, but they refused to leave. The next day, during a conversation that would have once felt routine, he hesitated again. Someone asked for his help, assuming his agreement. He paused, just for a moment longer than usual. The silence felt loud, charged with expectation. His heart raced, not from fear of the task, but from the unfamiliar act of considering himself. He eventually agreed, but the pause mattered. It marked awareness. It marked choice. And though nothing visibly changed in that moment, something inside him had shifted further. He was no longer moving purely out of habit. He was becoming aware of the cost of being strong all the time. And that awareness was beginning to reshape him in ways he could not yet predict. The cost of awareness revealed itself slowly, through discomfort rather than clarity. Once he began questioning his role, it became impossible to ignore the emotional toll it had taken on him. Situations that once felt manageable now felt overwhelming, not because they had changed, but because he could finally feel their weight. He noticed how tense his body remained throughout the day, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, even in moments meant for rest. Sleep no longer refreshed him. His mind stayed alert, replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes, wondering how many times he had erased himself to keep peace. He started recognizing a quiet anger beneath his calm exterior. Not explosive or obvious, but steady and persistent. It surprised him. Anger had never felt acceptable to him, so he had buried it beneath patience and understanding. Now it surfaced in subtle ways, in irritability over small things, in the urge to withdraw without explanation. He didn't act on it, but its presence forced him to acknowledge emotions he had long denied. At work, he began making small changes, arriving on time instead of early, leaving when his hours ended instead of staying late. These actions felt rebellious, though no one commented on them. The lack of reaction confused him. He had expected resistance, disappointment, some form of confrontation. Instead, everything continued as usual. This realization unsettled him more than conflict would have. It suggested that much of the pressure he felt had been self-imposed. The thought was uncomfortable, even painful. It meant facing the idea that he had sacrificed parts of himself without being asked to. In his personal life, he grew quieter, choosing to listen more than speak. He noticed how rarely anyone asked how he was truly doing. When they did, the question felt almost intrusive, as if honesty might disrupt an unspoken agreement. He still answered with reassurance, with practiced ease, but the words felt hollow. One evening, alone in his apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. Without distractions, he confronted the fear he had avoided for years. If he stopped being the reliable one, the strong one, what would remain? The fear was not of being disliked, but of being unseen. Strength had given him identity. Without it, he felt undefined. Yet beneath that fear was something else, something fragile but real, a sense of possibility. The idea that he could redefine himself, that he could exist without constant endurance, felt both liberating and terrifying. He didn't know how to begin that transformation, but for the first time, he allowed himself to consider it. The path ahead was unclear, but one truth had become undeniable. Continuing as he was would eventually break him, and acknowledging that truth, however painful, was the first step towards something different, something more honest, even if he wasn't yet ready to fully step into it. Change did not come through a dramatic decision or a sudden confrontation. It arrived in quiet moments, through choices so small they almost felt insignificant. He began paying attention to his limits, not to push against them, but to notice where they existed. For years, he had treated exhaustion as a weakness, something to overcome rather than respect. Now, he allowed himself to stop when his energy ran low. He turned down invitations without offering long explanations. Each refusal sent a familiar wave of guilt through him, but it passed more quickly than before. He was learning that discomfort did not mean danger. At work, he spoke up during a meeting for the first time in a way that wasn't about solving a problem for someone else. He expressed an opinion calmly and clearly, without over-explaining. The room did not fall silent. No one challenged him. The moment ended as uneventfully as it began, yet it stayed with him. He realized how much fear he had attached to simple self-expression. That fear had kept him silent far longer than necessary. Outside of work, he spent more time walking alone, letting his thoughts surface without interruption. He noticed how often he tried to justify his feelings, as if emotions needed permission to exist. Gradually, he stopped correcting himself. Sadness was allowed. Frustration was allowed. Even anger had space now, not as something to act on, but as something to understand. One afternoon, he received a message asking for help with a problem that wasn't truly his responsibility. He stared at the screen longer than usual, feeling the familiar pull to step in. This time, he didn't respond immediately. He considered his energy, his time, his needs. Then he replied with a brief, honest message, explaining that he couldn't take it on. The response came back polite, understanding. No resentment, no accusation. The simplicity of it left him unsettled. He had spent years bracing for reactions that rarely arrived. That evening, he reflected on how often he had confused obligation with connection. He had believed that being needed was the same as being valued. Letting go of that belief felt like loosening a grip he didn't realize he had been holding. The process was not clean or linear. Some days he slipped back into old patterns, agreeing too quickly, ignoring the warning signs. But now, he noticed when it happened. Awareness gave him the chance to course correct, to choose differently the next time. The changes were subtle, invisible to most, but profound to him. For the first time, his life felt less like something he was managing for others, and more like something he was beginning to inhabit for himself. He did not feel fully healed or resolved, but he felt present. And that presence, fragile as it was, marked a quiet but meaningful departure from the person he had been for so long. With presence came honesty, and honesty brought a new kind of discomfort. As he became more aware of his needs, he also became aware of how rarely he had shared them. Conversations began to feel layered, filled with words that meant one thing on the surface and another underneath. He noticed how often he smiled out of habit, how easily he reassured others even when he felt uncertain inside. These realizations did not make him bitter, but they did make him tired of pretending. He began experimenting with small truths. When someone asked how he was, he paused before answering. Instead of default reassurance, he offered something real, though still measured. "I've been a bit overwhelmed lately," he said once carefully. The response was not dramatic. The person nodded, offered understanding, and the conversation moved on. Yet the moment stayed with him. He had shared a piece of himself, and the world had remained steady. This encouraged him to continue. He started naming his feelings, first in private, then occasionally out loud. Putting words to emotions made them feel less heavy, less chaotic. He realized how much energy he had spent suppressing what he felt, mistaking control for strength. In his relationships, subtle shifts occurred. Some people leaned in, appreciating the honesty. Others seemed confused, unsure how to respond when he didn't play his usual role. That uncertainty made him uneasy, but he resisted the urge to smooth it over. He reminded himself that clarity was kinder than silent resentment. One evening, he declined a request from someone who had relied on him for years. He explained his boundaries without apology or blame. The conversation was awkward, filled with pauses and careful words. When it ended, he sat alone, heart racing, waiting for regret to set in. It didn't. Instead, he felt grounded, as if he had finally stood on solid ground rather than shifting sand. Not every moment felt like progress. Some days, doubt returned, whispering that he was becoming selfish, that he was letting people down. When those thoughts surfaced, he examined them instead of obeying them. He asked himself where they came from, whose voice they resembled. Often, they echoed expectations he had absorbed long ago, not truths he chose. This questioning gave him space to respond rather than react, space to decide who he wanted to be moving forward. He no longer measured his worth by how much he could endure. He began to see value in rest, in honesty, in limits. The transformation was still unfolding, uneven and uncertain, but it was real. He wasn't chasing a new version of himself. He was uncovering one that had been there all along, buried beneath years of quiet sacrifice. And for the first time, that version felt allowed to exist. As he settled into this new way of being, he noticed a subtle shift in how time felt. Days no longer blurred together in a constant rush of obligations. Moments stretched, giving him space to think, to breathe, to notice details he had once ignored. He became more selective with his energy, choosing where to invest it rather than giving it away automatically. This selectiveness was not driven by bitterness, but by care. He was learning that protecting his peace was not an act of selfishness, but of responsibility. With this understanding came a deeper awareness of his past. He began reflecting on the moments that had shaped his belief that he had to be strong all the time. Childhood memories surfaced, not with sharp pain, but with clarity. He remembered being praised for being easy, for not needing much, for handling things on his own. Those compliments, meant kindly, had quietly taught him that independence was more valuable than vulnerability. Recognizing this pattern helped him release some of the blame he carried. He wasn't broken. He had been trained. In present-day relationships, he continued practicing openness, even when it felt uncomfortable. He allowed pauses in conversations instead of filling them with reassurance. He asked for help in small ways, testing the ground beneath him. Each time, the fear lessened. People responded with care more often than he expected. This surprised him, forcing him to confront the belief that needing others made him a burden. Slowly, that belief loosened its hold. He also began to enjoy solitude differently. Being alone no longer felt like a sign of failure or disconnection. It felt intentional, restorative. In those quiet hours, he explored interests he had long neglected, not because they were productive, but because they brought him peace. There was no urgency to turn them into achievements. They existed simply because he enjoyed them. Not everything improved at once. There were moments when old habits resurfaced, when he agreed too quickly or ignored his limits. But now, those moments were followed by reflection rather than self-criticism. He corrected course gently, without punishment. This kindness toward himself was new and unfamiliar, yet deeply grounding. He realized that the strength he had chased for so long had always been incomplete. True strength, he was learning, included softness. It included the courage to be seen without armor, to rest without guilt, to ask without shame. As this understanding settled in, he felt a quiet confidence take root. Not the loud confidence of control, but a steady one, built on self-trust. He didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but for the first time, he felt certain of one thing. He no longer needed to disappear to make others comfortable. He could exist fully, honestly, and that was enough. With self-trust slowly taking shape, he began to notice how his presence affected the spaces around him. Conversations felt more balanced now, less like performances and more like exchanges. He listened with intention, not to fix or carry, but to understand. When he spoke, his words felt steadier, grounded in thought rather than reflex. This shift changed the rhythm of his relationships. Some people adjusted naturally, meeting him in this new place with respect. Others struggled, subtly pushing back against boundaries they were no longer used to. He didn't take it personally. He understood now that change could feel threatening to those who benefited from the old version of him. That understanding brought compassion without self-betrayal. At work, he noticed an unexpected outcome. By no longer absorbing everything, he created space for others to step up. Problems that once landed automatically on his shoulders were now shared. The realization was both relieving and humbling. He had believed he was indispensable, yet the world functioned just fine without his constant intervention. This did not diminish his value. Instead, it freed him from a role that had quietly consumed him. Outside of obligations, he felt a growing sense of alignment. His actions matched his values more closely now. When something didn't feel right, he trusted that feeling instead of dismissing it. He began to say yes only when he meant it, and no without over-justifying. These choices brought a calm he had never experienced before. Not happiness in the dramatic sense, but a deep steadiness. There were still difficult moments. Some relationships faded as expectations changed. Letting go was painful, but it also felt honest. He recognized that holding on out of fear would only recreate the same patterns he was trying to leave behind. One evening, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The man he used to be was not weak or naive. He had been doing the best he could with what he knew. That realization softened his view of the past. Instead of regret, he felt gratitude for the lessons it had given him. The journey was not about becoming someone new, but about reclaiming parts of himself he had set aside to survive. As he looked ahead, the future no longer felt like something to endure. It felt open, uncertain, yes, but open in a way that invited curiosity rather than fear. He understood now that strength was not proven through sacrifice alone. It was revealed through balance, through honesty, through the willingness to live without hiding. And with that understanding, he continued forward, not rushing, not retreating, but walking at his own pace, grounded in the quiet confidence of someone who finally knew where he stood. The quiet confidence he carried began to influence the way he approached uncertainty. Where he once rushed to resolve discomfort, he now allowed questions to remain unanswered. This patience changed his relationship with fear. Instead of treating it as an enemy, he saw it as information, a signal pointing toward areas that still needed care. When anxiety surfaced, he didn't immediately push it away. He observed it, traced it back to its source, and responded with intention rather than impulse. This shift gave him a sense of control that felt healthier than anything he had known before. He was no longer controlling outcomes, only his responses. In moments of challenge, he discovered a new steadiness. Setbacks no longer felt like personal failures, but natural parts of growth. He learned to recover without self-judgment, to rest without guilt, to begin again without shame. This resilience was quieter than the endurance he once prided himself on, but far more sustainable. In his relationships, trust deepened. Because he was clearer with himself, he was clearer with others. He no longer promised what he couldn't give or gave what he would later resent. This honesty simplified his life. Fewer misunderstandings, fewer unspoken expectations, more room for genuine connection. Even when conversations were difficult, they felt clean, free of the tension that came from hidden feelings. He also began to notice joy in unexpected places. Not the loud, fleeting kind, but small moments of contentment that didn't demand anything from him. A quiet morning, a shared laugh, a sense of being at ease in his own skin. These moments reminded him that life didn't have to be earned through exhaustion. It could be experienced through presence. As he continued forward, he stopped measuring progress by dramatic milestones. Growth, he realized, often looked like consistency. Choosing himself again and again, even when it felt ordinary. Especially when it felt ordinary. The person he was becoming felt familiar, like a version of himself he had known once but lost touch with. Reconnecting with that self brought a sense of peace he had never been able to force. He understood now that strength did not come from carrying everything alone. It came from knowing what to carry, what to release, and when to ask for help. This understanding didn't mark an ending, but a continuation. A life lived with intention rather than obligation, with boundaries rather than burnout, and with a calm assurance that he was no longer surviving his life. He was finally living it. He did not notice the change all at once, but others began to. There was something steadier in the way he carried himself now, something quieter yet more grounded. He no longer rushed to explain who he was or justify his decisions. When plans changed or expectations shifted, he adapted without resentment. This calm was not indifference. It was clarity. He had learned the difference. Where he once felt responsible for everyone's comfort, he now understood that harmony could not come at the cost of his own well-being. This understanding reshaped how he showed up in the world. He spoke with intention, choosing words that reflected truth rather than habit. Silence no longer felt like failure. Sometimes it felt like wisdom. In moments of conflict, he resisted the urge to absorb blame that wasn't his. He listened, acknowledged, but did not surrender himself to keep peace. This was new, and it still felt unfamiliar, but it felt right. There were days when doubt crept back in, whispering that he was doing too much, or not enough, or something in between. When that happened, he grounded himself in what he knew. He knew how it felt to disappear for others. He knew how it felt to live exhausted and unseen. And he knew he did not want to return there. That certainty became his anchor. He also learned to forgive himself for the time it took to arrive here. Healing was not a straight path, and he stopped demanding perfection from the process. Some days were lighter, filled with ease and connection. Other days were heavy, marked by old habits resurfacing. But even on those days, he no longer turned against himself. He met struggle with patience instead of punishment. This self-respect changed everything. It softened his inner world, making space for growth without fear. Slowly, he realized that the strength he had chased his entire life had transformed into something deeper. It was no longer about endurance or sacrifice. It was about alignment, about living in a way that did not require constant self-betrayal. As he moved forward, he carried this truth with him. He was allowed to take up space without apology, to rest without explanation, to exist without earning it. This realization did not make life perfect, but it made it honest. And in that honesty, he found a sense of peace that no amount of forced strength had ever given him. What surprised him most was how ordinary life began to feel again, in the best possible way. Not empty, not dull, but balanced. The constant tension that once lived beneath every decision had softened. He woke up with a clearer mind, no longer bracing himself for the day ahead. Challenges still existed, but they no longer felt personal, no longer felt like proof of failure. He met them with steadiness instead of urgency. This steadiness allowed him to be present in moments he once rushed through. He noticed how conversations flowed when he wasn't trying to manage outcomes, how people responded when he showed up as himself rather than as a solution. There was less effort, less performance, just presence. He also became more comfortable with uncertainty. The need to have everything figured out had loosened its grip. He understood now that clarity often came through movement, not control. Taking one honest step at a time was enough. In quiet moments, he reflected on the person he had been and felt no shame, only understanding. That version of himself had carried him through what he didn't yet know how to face. He honored that strength without letting it define him anymore. In relationships, he felt freer. Freer to stay, freer to leave, freer to be exactly who he was without shrinking or hardening. Some connections deepened, rooted in mutual respect. Others naturally faded, leaving space rather than emptiness. This flow felt natural, unforced. He trusted it. Most importantly, he trusted himself. Not because he had all the answers, but because he knew he would listen when something felt wrong and act when something felt right. This trust became his foundation. Life no longer felt like something happening to him. It felt like something he was actively participating in. And while the journey was far from over, he no longer feared what lay ahead. He had learned that he could meet the future without armor, without disappearing, without proving his worth through sacrifice. He could move forward grounded, honest, and whole. And that knowledge, quiet and steady, stayed with him as he continued on, living not from obligation, but from truth. With that sense of wholeness came a deeper responsibility, not to others, but to himself. He realized that self-awareness was not a finish line. It was a practice. Each day offered new chances to either honor what he had learned or slip back into old habits. The difference now was intention. When he felt himself overextending, he noticed it early. When he felt disconnected, he paused instead of pushing forward blindly. This attentiveness changed the rhythm of his life. He no longer rushed through discomfort just to reach relief. He stayed present long enough to understand what it was asking of him. In doing so, he discovered that many of his fears softened when met with patience rather than resistance. He also began to redefine success on his own terms. It was no longer about approval, productivity, or how useful he appeared to others. Success became alignment, ending a day without resentment, speaking honestly without fear, resting without guilt. These quiet victories mattered more than anything visible from the outside. At times, he felt a grief for the years spent living differently. Not a heavy grief, but a reflective one. He allowed himself to feel it without judgment. Mourning what could have been did not mean rejecting what was. It meant acknowledging his humanity. This acceptance deepened his compassion, not just for himself, but for others still caught in cycles he recognized well. He listened more gently now, aware that everyone carried unseen battles. Yet he no longer tried to rescue them from those battles. He understood that growth could not be borrowed or forced. It had to be chosen. In moments of quiet confidence, he felt a sense of gratitude settle in. Gratitude for the discomfort that had awakened him. Gratitude for the limits that had taught him where he ended and others began. Gratitude for the courage it took to change without applause. Life still presented uncertainty, but it no longer felt like a threat. It felt like space. Space to evolve, to adjust, to become more himself with time. As he moved forward, he carried a simple truth with him, steady and unshaken. He did not need to be everything for everyone to be something meaningful. He only needed to be honest, present, and willing to live in alignment with who he was becoming. And that, he knew now, was more than enough. As time moved forward, he became aware of a quiet maturity settling into his life. Not the kind that came from age alone, but the kind that came from reflection and choice. He stopped reacting to every situation as if it demanded urgency. Instead, he responded with thoughtfulness, allowing space between stimulus and action. This pause became one of his greatest strengths. It gave him clarity. It gave him freedom. He noticed how his nervous system no longer lived in a constant state of alert. His body felt calmer, his breath deeper. Even when stress appeared, it passed through him rather than taking residence. He learned to trust this rhythm, to respect his capacity instead of challenging it. In relationships, he embraced depth over quantity. He invested his energy where there was reciprocity, where honesty was welcomed rather than punished. This selectiveness brought peace. He no longer feared being misunderstood by everyone, only by those unwilling to listen. That distinction mattered. He also grew more comfortable standing alone in his decisions. Approval had lost its grip on him. When doubt arose, he returned to his values, using them as a compass rather than seeking reassurance. This internal guidance steadied him in moments that once would have unraveled him. He saw clearly now that strength was not something to display, but something to live quietly. In everyday moments, he practiced gratitude, not as a ritual, but as awareness. Awareness of how far he had come. Awareness of the life he was building intentionally. There were still lessons ahead, still areas where growth would be required, but he no longer rushed the process. He trusted timing. He trusted himself. The future, once heavy with expectation, now felt open and spacious. He didn't need certainty to move forward, only honesty. As he continued on his path, he carried a calm assurance that whatever came next, he would meet it without abandoning himself. And that commitment, steady and unwavering, became the foundation of everything that followed. In this final stretch of his journey, he stopped thinking of growth as something dramatic or visible. It became woven into the smallest parts of his life. The way he chose his mornings slowly without rushing. The way he allowed silence to exist without trying to fill it. The way he listened to his own body and mind with respect instead of resistance. These moments did not announce themselves as milestones. Yet together, they reshaped his life more deeply than any sudden change ever could. He realized that peace was not the absence of struggle, but the absence of self-betrayal. Even when days were difficult, he no longer felt divided inside. His actions matched his values, and that alignment gave him stability. Looking back, he understood that losing himself had never happened all at once. It had been a slow disappearance, made of small compromises and quiet endurance. Finding himself again followed the same pattern. Small, honest choices repeated until they formed a new way of living. He no longer needed to prove his strength through suffering. He allowed himself joy without suspicion and rest without justification. In relationships, he showed up fully, not as a role, but as a person. Some people stayed, some drifted away, and he accepted both without bitterness. He understood now that belonging did not require self-sacrifice. As he moved forward, he carried no illusion that life would remain easy or predictable. But he trusted his ability to face it without losing himself again. That trust was his true achievement. He had learned how to stay present in his own life, how to hold space for others without abandoning his own needs, how to live honestly even when it felt uncomfortable. And with that understanding, he stepped into the future quietly, steadily, and whole. Not chasing validation, not hiding behind strength, simply living fully and truthfully as himself.